Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. These days, we are hearing a lot about autism. And yet, not so long ago, it was considered rare. And while you may not realize it, chances are good you know someone who's on the autism spectrum. Often misunderstood, autism is broadly a neurodevelopmental phenomenon that affects the way people experience the world. It affects every aspect of a person's development, thought processes, behaviors, and sensory functioning. Our understanding of autism has improved, and research has revealed underlying strengths of autism. One of the insights I have gleaned from this interview and my preparation for it is that having an autistic person on a team can be a huge advantage. They often notice things that neurotypical people miss. I mean, there would be no Star Trek without Spock. Yet in spite of these advances in research and advantages of autistic people, many of them are not receiving the services and understanding that they need. A very well-known autistic person and expert on the topic is today's guest, Dr. Temple Grandin. Temple did not speak for the first 4 years of life, and doctors recommended that she be institutionalized. Fortunately, her brilliant and powerful mother disagreed with the recommendation. Instead, Temple was exposed to creative opportunities in school and in working with farm animals. In contrast to the limitations of institutionalized life, these opportunities revealed Temple's genius. She had visual strengths that enabled her to see things in extraordinarily creative ways. Later in life, she spearheaded revolutionary changes that facilitated more humane treatment of cattle worldwide. Temple is a powerful voice and advocate for autistic and non-neurotypical people. She has also written many best-selling books, one of which was made into a film about her life called Temple Grandin, starring Claire Danes as Temple. By the way, I highly recommend this film, which was described by the New York Times as the best biopic in a very, very long time. Temple has received multiple major awards and recognitions, including Time Magazine's 2010 annual list of the 100 most influential people in the world. So please join Temple and me as we do a deep dive into the unexpected advantages of autism. Dr. Temple Grandin, who I'll be calling Temple for this interview, welcome to Super Psyched.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could start just with the basics, and if you could tell the audience, what is autism and what is it not?
Well, basically, autism is being socially awkward. And it can vary from somebody who never learns to talk to somebody who's probably working in Silicon Valley or maybe running a big Silicon Valley company. Because you might have some of the brain circuits for social taken out and you get brain circuits for geek stuff.
Yep.
About that simple. So in the milder forms, I think autism is just part of normal human variation.
Sure.
Now, when I was 4 years old, I had no speech. When I was a little kid, I have definitely had a big disability. And that's the problem with autism, is they've changed the diagnostic label to where you can have somebody who can't dress themselves, got the same name as somebody who's probably brought you some of your radio station equipment.
Yep.
You see, this is the problem. It's such a big spectrum.
Huge.
And you take out, some social circuits, and you get geek circuits. Because I think a brain can be more cognitive or thinking, or a brain can be more social emotional. Certain amount of that's normal variation.
Yeah. And there's so many different points, as you mentioned, to it: visual, language, mathematical, host of different areas within the spectrum where a person really differentiates him or herself almost like a snowflake from all other, that there's obviously no carbon copy.
There's kind of three different kinds of specialized thought. And I talk about that in my book, The Autistic Brain.
Yeah.
When I first started out, I thought everybody thought in pictures. And I wrote about that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. And I thought everybody on the autism spectrum thought in pictures. That's actually wrong. What I have since learned, and there's more and more research to support this, is that the visual thinkers like me, scientists call this an object visualizer. I think in photographs. Then you have your more mathematical pattern thinker. That's called visual spatial. Much more mathematical. That's going to be a programmers. And then you've got the word thinkers, where everybody, these are the people that think in words.
Sure.
And then there's mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. Now, what tends to happen in autism is you tend to be really good at one of these.
Right.
And bad at some of the others. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing strengths.
And I saw your brain scan because you shared it in one of your presentation where you show your visual center as being twice that of a neurotypical individual. Is that?
Well, I have a very large visual thinking circuit. But the thing I can't do is I cannot do algebra. It's just too abstract. So I'm seeing smart kids that are visual thinkers being screened out of everything as they can't do algebra. And we actually have big skill shortages right now, especially in skilled trades, things like welding. Now, there's a certain part of engineering I call the clever engineering department. You've got the mathematical part of engineering, but then you have the people that build the really clever things. And a lot of that equipment now is all coming from Europe. And the reason for that is they have kept skilled trades. And this would be true for a poultry processing plant. It's also true for a clever machine that makes swirly chocolate cookies with swirls. Because I went shopping for some of that equipment online, and I found that's from Europe. And then if you want to outfit your container ship terminal, that's going to be Europe or China to outfit that. We are paying the price for taking skilled trades out of the schools 25 years ago. We are paying for that right now.
And we're actually going to do a deep dive into that in a few questions. But before we do that, there are three terms that we're going to probably be throwing around fairly often, that it would be neurotypical, non-neurotypical, and neurodiversity. Could you explain what these three terms mean?
Well, neurotypical is just a fancier word for normal. Okay, what's normal? It's, normal is actually a range. I talked earlier about, a brain can be more social or a brain could be more thinking and cognitive. A certain amount of variation would be normal.
Right.
Now, obviously, if a child never learns to talk, that's definite disability. Neurodiversity, you need different minds. Let's go back to the visual thinkers and the math thinkers. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why your iPhone's easy to use.
Yep.
The mathematical engineers had to make it work, because if the mathematicians had made the interface, that phone would have been a dud. And you ought to see some of the awful problems that we have to deal with submitting journal articles. They are the worst interfaces ever made.
So in other words, if you wanted to have a nice user experience, let's get a visual thinker.
You need the visual thinker to do the user interface. Now, I don't know how to do the rest of it, but the iPhone was a big success and all the copies were a big success because I didn't have to read the directions to use it.
For sure. And I think that their slogan, which used to be Think Different, could almost be a slogan for autistic people. You've also mentioned that we're not for autistic people. We would never have invented the spear. We'd still be sitting around fires like cave people. But I just wanted to toss out, on a level, many of us believe that everyone thinks the way we do. And obviously, that's so untrue on so many levels. Of course, there are infinite possibilities for different experience for autistic individuals in a general sense. But in a general sense, I was wondering if you could put a USB cable into a neurotypical person to allow them to think and feel some of the common things an autistic person might think and feel. What might
there's a lot of little social things. What amazes me is how I remember going to a dinner one time and they did a lot of chit chat and they were having such a great time. And I was amazed at the lack of information this conversation had. It was kind of a sports themed chit chat with no information.
No content.
Which I find very, very boring. And I'm realizing when I first started my career, I thought everybody thought in pictures. And I criticized some of the mistakes made on a project. I said it was stupidity. Actually, what it was lack of visual thinking. But I didn't know that I had visual thinking. That I thought everybody thought in pictures. Now I just learned a couple of years ago about a condition called aphantasia. These are people that might be good at math, and they have no visual thinking.
Wow.
And I had a guy email me about 2 weeks ago that he just discovered he had aphantasia, and he discovered visual thinking when he read my book, Thinking in Pictures, because he didn't know it existed. So
Wow.
The first step is realizing different ways of thinking exist. I'm also learning more and more about how different emotions exist. I can get very, very emotional, but not about the same things. Like I was watching the SpaceX launch. Let me tell you, that was a total geek out for me. And I was biting my nails. I was glued to an iPad until they safely got into orbit. And that's the kind of thing I just thought was so cool, geeking out on that, and got real emotional about.
Yeah. And what type of emotions emerged as you were watching?
Happiness. Also, I went and I visited NASA at Cape Canaveral, and that same launch control room that Elon Musk was in. I've been in that launch control room.
Very cool.
And that was the very emotional experience, because when we went to the moon, that was one of the greatest things our generation ever did. And I got very emotional standing in the place where some of this stuff was done.
Yeah.
I want to tell you why you need visual thinkers. We went and visited a launch pad where they were just finishing up construction. And I found something in that launch pad that shouldn't be there. I'm not a rocket scientist, but as we walked onto this launch pad, I watched a raccoon waddle down the steps and go off into the bushes.
Oh.
And he'd been up inside there at night where the electrical stuff was.
I can't believe this.
That's not a good combination there.
No.
And I said, I'll tell you what he'll chew. If you've handled wires a whole lot, there'll be salt in your hands on it. He will chew that.
And that would be disastrous.
Yeah, you better look really carefully. Nobody else saw the raccoon.
One of the things
I
that
was
you
the only
mentioned.
one who saw it.
Yeah, you mentioned that part of the autistic experience is that sometimes for you, the most obvious thing is the least obvious thing to a neurotypical person.
Well, the raccoon wasn't right. He was it might have been 60 feet away. We were under the launch pad, and there was a set of steps that went up inside the base. He came across a landing. I saw him come down a whole flight of stairs and run off into the deep bushes.
That could have been disastrous.
And nobody else saw it.
Wow.
And I was just on a very, very brief tour. I wasn't even there very long. But this is why you need to have us visual thinkers too.
For sure. One of the things that you said that blew my mind after Rain Man came out was the reason that he just couldn't tolerate the sound of the fire alarm or some alarm was because oftentimes your senses are really almost all the volumes are at a 10. Right. Your visual, your auditory. That's one of the reasons why you don't often have eye contact, because there's just too much stimulation.
Well, that's right. And
part of what it's like?
Sensory issues are very variable. Mine were mainly sound sensitivity. And when the loud school bell went off, it hurt my ears. It's one of the ways you can help a kid with that.
What?
Give him a chance to control the sound. So he's afraid of the hairdryer or afraid of the vacuum cleaner. Let him play with it and turn it off. Turn it on. Turn it off. Where they control it. And then they might go hitting the vacuum cleaner to liking to play with it.
Sure.
Very simple thing you can do. But there is research now that's very clear that the sensory circuits in the autistic brain are not normal. And they tend to be overreactive. In fact, I just updated my the way I see it book, and put in some of the new references on the sensory systems are not normal.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, this paper that was just stuck in the book, it's an interesting paper. It's people on the autism spectrum looking at what therapies that they think are important. And one of the therapies that came up was OT, that deals with the sensory problems.
Occupational therapy.
It would be treatments for sensory oversensitivity be one of my top priorities.
Sure.
For research, because they can be very, very debilitating.
Great stuff. If a neurotypical person were to have a laminated card of things to know about autism and how to relate and to appreciate an autistic colleague or a friend, what should the neurotypical person know?
Well, attention shifting is a problem. I get criticized all the time for interrupting at interviews. And the reason why I do that is I don't know how to time and break in.
Got it.
That's something I have a problem. In a work situation, you've got to give clear, direct directions. One of my very first jobs, I criticized some welding, and I said, look like a pigeon had doo-dooed on it. And the plant engineer pulled me into his office and explained that was not an acceptable way to deal with it. He made me apologize. He told me what I should do. But let's say you have someone on the spectrum doing programming, and I'm sure there's plenty of them out in Silicon Valley.
You better believe it.
Well, they need clear instruction on what the outcome is.
Uh-huh.
You need to design some software on this platform. It's got to use only this much memory, and this is what it has to do. And then let the person design it, and then give them a deadline, a reasonable deadline, not a crazy deadline. Get it done. And I learned very early in my career when I was figuring out the design parameters for a project. I wanted to get those all set up. So I knew the budget. I knew where the boundaries for the job were. What did it have to achieve?
Sure. I've also been told that autistic people can be fantastic communicators and that their level of communication between each other is far better than the say autistic person to autistic person is better than neurotypical person to neurotypical person. Has that been your experience as well?
Well, it depends upon what you're communicating. Sure. If it's a shared interest, and it's friends through shared interests, because the thing that's the biggest turn on is the stuff that you are working on.
Totally.
I mean, it's all about the project, and it's just the coolest thing. And I think a lot of neurotypicals have a hard time understanding that something like the rocket launch is just the coolest thing. And I was speaking out on the fact that a costume designer worked on designing the spacesuits. I thought that was just so cool. Of course, I looked it all up. But that's the kind of thing that I just geek out on. And I think a lot of more socially, most people, they just can't get into that. I think the first thing is to understand that there are these different minds. Another interesting thing I learned when I went down to Cape Canaveral is I talked to the people that ran the museum, and they were telling me some very interesting things. Now, of course, everybody wants to try out the shuttle landing simulator and stuff like that, but the engineers just wanted to, put the engineering specs in the museum.
Totally.
And the people that make the museum says, we got to tell the human side of the story, because that's going to turn on the public. And you actually want to kind of make some of both.
Right.
That's the different minds right there.
Got it. I have many autistic people in my life. I do live in Silicon Valley, and the virtues are just incredible, and the strengths are beyond belief in so many cases. I think that a neurotypical person should have a laminated card of how to appreciate and what to expect when interacting, because the gifts of getting to interface with someone who thinks differently are so just huge.
The first thing is to realize that they think differently, because it was an interesting journey for me to discover that other people were not visual thinkers. And then I discovered that some people were pattern thinkers. And then later on, when I did the Autistic Brain book, that was in 2012, I would have been doing the research for that. I discovered there was research, there's actual research studies that support object visualizer is one kind. Then you have visual spatial, that's your mathematical kind. And then you got word thinker. And the thing that's interesting about the mathematical mind and the visual mind is you won't find a person who's super good in both of them.
Right.
Doesn't exist. This is why you're going to need the teams of people. Let's look at some engineering things where you need visual thinking. Let's the Boeing Max disaster. When I first heard about that first airplane wreck, I looked up the ground radar. I only knew two things about this plane. I looked at the ground radar tracing, and I go, something's really wrong here. The other thing is the plane was only a few months old. Okay, those two, I said, something is really wrong here. It's bad, and it's going to be bad. Then I learned about the angle of attack sensor, that basically the flight controls have been wired to a single, very fragile sensor. See this Sharpie pen?
Yep.
That's about the size of an angle of attack sensor, and it's stuck on the side of the airplane right by the cockpit window, and it got snapped off.
Oh, my goodness.
And when I found out what an angle of attack sensor was. Then I went to the airport and I was looking at them on every single plane. Now, normally it measures air angle, tell you if a plane's stalling, and it's an indicator on the instrument panel. No, and the plane has 2 of them. But they had only wired one of them to the flight controls, and they did not fully inform the pilots.
Amazing.
And the pilots were not that well trained, and they freaked out and just kept pulling back on the control yoke. And then I had an interesting conversation with a pilot when I was coming back from England, an expert pilot. He says, yeah, I'm not certified for this Airbus. I can walk into this plane and just fly it. I've flown everything. And I explained to him how I designed equipment in the meat industry. And I said, I've got to, design it for all kinds of different people. And he said, I just sort of shut off the automation and fly the plane. Put the headphones on for the next 6 hours. We get to Denver. The headphones are off. I said, I've got to ask you a question. So we were taxiing in. I said, I design equipment. And I can't design it for the super smart person. I have to design it for the average person.
Brilliant.
Not designing it for you. And you know what he said?
What?
I had never thought of that.
Exactly.
Maybe it was very difficult for an expert pilot to imagine how a less experienced, maybe not very well-trained pilot would react.
Hadn't
thought of that.
I mean, the more that I get to know your work and get to know you, I almost feel like every team should have an autistic person or more on the team, because what's obvious to you is so not obvious to the rest of the world. And the neurodiversity that we experience really fortifies the project. Is that
well, you need not just visual thinker, you also need the mathematicians.
Exactly.
Well, you've got the mathematicians. But I think sometimes they're not seeing some of the problems. There's been really bad stuff that's gone on social media. And I think it's difficult for some of those mathematicians to admit that some of that stuff that's gone on has been really bad. And this is where maybe they need the social mind there to help guide things. No, we need to have the different kinds of minds. I can't design the airplane, but there's no way I would have trusted a single fragile sensor. Okay, so I snapped this thing off.
And by the way, you're holding a little Sharpie pen. It's very tiny.
A bird can just rip it right off. Or maybe the mechanic's ladder touched it.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's like, and so, okay, if I just break this thing off, what does the computer do? The computer assumes the plane is stalling, which is going up like this. The computer starts shoving the nose down. And the
oh my goodness.
And the default setting was stall. It should have been fly normally with an indicator to return to the airport to replace the angle of attack sensor. But why did they only use one when the plane has 2?
What's the answer?
That violates a lot of rules of engineering.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you don't have to be an aeronautical engineer to understand this.
Sure.
And it was a disastrous, 2 plane loads of people killed. Disastrous mess.
And what you're describing is a project that was the byproduct of the absence of neurodiversity. It sounds like we lose a lot.
Well, and the other thing is the financial types had gotten in there and were trying to save money, and they had the pilot training moved away from the factory, and so you wouldn't have been getting the engineers walking by and, well, let's go check out what they're doing in the simulator. And
absolutely.
You see, lost that communication too. So there's a lot more to it. Now people that are experts in aeronautical design look at that airplane and want to throw up because they should have gone with a different airframe, put these big, huge, gigantic fuel-efficient engines on this. The air, it's a really kludgy design. But the fact of the matter is, it got down to this.
And you're holding up the little pen.
I'm holding this up because an angle
and they can't see this on the audio. So basically, something about the width and the size of a Sharpie pen that you're holding up.
A Sharpie pen broke off a plane.
Oh my goodness!
And I had to look up what an angle of attack sensor was. I didn't know what it was. I looked it up, and then next time at the airport, I'm going
looking around.
You have got to be kidding. And the problem is, it's not stupidity. The mathematician calculates risk. And maybe the mathematician and Fantasia so he wouldn't be able to see risk. But there's
Sure.
different ways people would think. Because I've observed another super interesting thing. I've been to a lot of companies out in your neck of the woods.
Yes.
So I go in a company that does film animation,
Sure.
real creative. And you should see the decorations in the office. They've taken tool sheds. They tore out the cubicles. You put tool sheds in and you make them into speakeasies. You make them into starships, tiki huts, just all kinds of fantastical things. Then you go into the programming room of the more mathematical people. There's almost no decoration. They might have a few geometric things on the wall. You go into some of these big tech companies and, conference rooms, boring, white boringness.
Gosh, that explains so much.
It's amazing the lack of decoration.
Yes.
Where the movie company that's making all our favorite movies, doing all that animation, their offices are just a fantastic art playground of decorations.
This dovetails so nicely with one of the experiences I had in college. I was at one of the Claremont colleges, and if you wanted to go to a great visual party, you went to Harvey Mudd, the engineering school. And that was so counterintuitive to me at the time. But as you relay this to me, I mean, they came up with the most fantastical ideas. They were it was so
You
great.
need both minds, because one thing I noticed about the SpaceX ship, it looked cool. And when you went up in the launch thing, and you go, they got this jet bridge that goes up to the capsule. It looks like Space Odyssey.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's so cool. And the inside of it's so cool. And then you go inside the space station. I've done all the little video tours of the space station, and you look at the exercise equipment. Looks like somebody made it in their garage. It works. But you see, that's the engineering mind. And they figure out all the math. One thing I learned about the exercise bike is really cool. And if they hadn't done this right, it could wreck the space station.
Sure.
Couldn't attach the exercise bike really stiff to the station wall because it might shake the solar panels.
Wow.
Very bad results.
Sure.
So the mathematicians figured that that's the mathematical side.
Got to have it.
On the other hand, the equipment, it's kind of junky looking in the space station. It's purely functional.
And what's important, in your opinion, about going beyond the purely functional and making it really cool and beautiful?
Well, I think it makes it easier for the people. You need to have both.
Yeah.
Okay, and then for the kids out there, they're getting bored in school and they need something to do. JavaScript and Google Android runs the displays in the Dragon, and they uses regular C++ programming, open Linux platform. I don't know how to do any of this stuff, but I know how to tell you how to look it up online because I'm seeing too many kids getting addicted to video games and they're going nowhere. They're going absolutely nowhere.
Let's actually go there.
Silicon Valley parents don't let their kids get addicted to video games.
So you're right in the heart of one of my most important questions. I mean, you've mentioned that we lose out on the genius of autistic people in many ways. The curriculum you mentioned at schools often don't support the needs and strengths of autistic people. And for visual autistic people, you've almost described video game addiction as being like an opium den for visual autistic. And we're losing out.
They're not becoming programmers.
Exactly. So we're losing them.
That's not where they're ending up. We got kids growing up today that have never used tools at all.
So what can we do? How do we break the problem?
If I could do one thing for the schools, we're going to put all the hands-on stuff back in. Cooking, sewing, theater, woodworking, auto shop, welding, drafting. Let's get some 3D printers in there and let them play with that.
What would that do?
Let's get these things into the schools so that kids get exposed to this stuff and they get interested in it.
What would that do?
Well, maybe that kid would end up going into a skilled trade. We have a gigantic loss of skills. There's a whole part of engineering I call clever engineering. You know what I just found out reading The Economist recently?
What's that?
The most advanced machine for making electronic chips, like for inside your phone, is in Holland.
Oh, my goodness.
And I have looked at pictures of this machine. And so I'm pretty sure some of the visual thinkers were involved in making some of the little fiddly mechanical things in it work.
So if these kids could use their hands, they might be they'd find more flow states in the more elemental and then use that for something besides video games. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's right. And the other thing, I looked up Common Core 2nd, 3rd grade math lessons. just
Sure.
last night. And I never got so lost.
Really?
And how about teaching some math that you can use? Because I then went and looked up practical mathematics for welders and for carpenters. Guess what? They teach old-fashioned borrowing and subtraction the way I was taught.
They're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I'm not saying that we should throw out everything they do in some of the new math. I can understand why they're doing it. But I looked up the second grade lesson and I was getting lost.
Wow.
Too much strain on my working memory. Let me just memorize my times tables and learn how to borrow, and let me mark up the paper because I can't do it otherwise unless I have a calculator. I got no working memory.
I believe Einstein said that intelligence is either knowing a thing or knowing where to look it up. Is that consistent with your experience there?
Well, the thing I'm finding is a lot of people, they don't think to look stuff up. I can't believe some of the emails I'll get. I have someone will say to me, how do I find a college for my kid? And they didn't even think to type the name of their state and colleges into Google. I'm not kidding. Or somebody writes to me, what is this drug? Like, what is it?
Rather than looking it up.
Not my opinion of it. What is it?
What is it?
I had to go look it up. I didn't know what it was. They hadn't thought to just look it up.
Yeah. That's a symptom of what problem is that a symptom? I'm trying to put it together myself.
Well, I have in my livestock handling class, I wanted to make sure that the students learn some things other than livestock handling. And one of the things they can do when they're going to learn how to look stuff up online in my class. And I let them pick out a subject in animal behavior, any subject in animal behavior that interests them. And I want 2 journal article abstracts off of 4 different databases.
Sure.
And then I want them summarizing them in an abstract that long. And I'm finding
about a quarter of a page, third of a page.
Right. Half a page. Right.
Half a page.
And so I find for a third of the students, it's a real easy assignment. But for another third of the students, they've never done it before and they didn't know the databases existed.
So is that actually a symptom that you're noticing amongst autistic people in particular?
No, I'm regular students.
Just all neurotypical
regular students. I'm finding writing skills are atrocious. And I'm finding out that the student never had a teacher mark up the work and correct the grammar on a term paper. But graduate students right now, I'm having to teach them writing.
So this is omnipresent.
Yeah, and these are smart kids. But they never had to write book reports. I think book reports are really important because you've got to read the book, summarize it, and then critique it. And they've never written a book report.
I think you're onto something. You know, when I was a teen, just to pivot a little, the words geek and nerd were horrible put downs, and now they're strengths. And over the years, I've noticed a trend in society in which there's a recognition of the strengths of autism. The TV shows like The Good Doctor and Atypical, and this movie called Temple Grandin, starring Claire Danes, that you probably heard of, really highlight those virtues. And I was wondering, Temple, do you see a world in which the word autistic becomes viewed by the general public as a strength?
Well, there needs to be some changes. The thing I've noticed is that people in Silicon Valley, you walk into rooms full of programmers, and I know there's a third of them there that are hardcore autistic, and they avoid the label.
Sure.
And I think a big mistake that was made was taking out the Asperger's label, because what the Asperger's was, it's socially awkward with no speech delay. That's going to be typical Silicon Valley nerd or geek.
So you'd advocate for the return of Asperger's? Or
return to some kind of a designation where it's basically just socially awkward with no obvious speech delay. In other words, nobody's running to the doctor because of speech delay. When I was 3, I had no speech at all and constant tantrums. It was obvious something was drastically wrong with me. And whether you just called it fully verbal autism, I don't really care what you call it. But what I think's really bad is you've got, you might see a 12-year-old kid, fully verbal, could be doing, high-level work in a class with nonverbal individuals, going nowhere. You see, the problem is they've broadened the spectrum so broad that from an educators and teaching standpoint, we're really getting into a mess here. And then the same kind of kid, I'll go to the gifted conference or the twice exceptional conference, and I'm seeing the same autistic kids. Then I go into a seminar on social skills, except it's now at a gifted conference. And it's the same stuff they're talking in the seminars. Same stuff. So it's sort of like one label goes to this support group, this label goes to this support group, and they also have all their own books. Well, I got another book, Calling All Minds, all my children's projects. Things I did as a kid, like making parachutes, little bird kites. But we've got kids today that have never made a paper snowflake.
Oh, my goodness. You're holding up a paper snowflake there.
Simple. And you know what? I had a teacher ask me about this. In all seriousness, just in the last couple of months, she says, well, what if the kid cuts it wrong and it falls apart? And I go, you learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
It's a piece of you.
Exactly.
It's what it is. You learn from your mistakes. That's something Elon Musk has said. You know,
Absolutely.
He's wrecked some pretty expensive stuff, but he learned from those mistakes. Because if you're too scared to make a mistake, you're never going to go anywhere. But I had a teacher worried about a kid's self-esteem that they cut a paper snowflake wrong and it fell apart. Well, you get another piece of printer paper and you try again. It's a piece of printer paper.
Sure. Learn to fail or fail to learn.
Well, yeah, it's and then I was going through the Common Core elementary school lessons. I'm going, oh man, if I'd been a kid, I would have been lost.
Yeah.
That had been my third grade.
You would not be the Temple Grandin you are today.
I don't know. And then I go and look up practical mathematics for welders. I went to Amazon. I did a little search inside the book as far as let me look at them for free.
Sure.
I got inside the book enough to see all the old-fashioned math. Because it starts with the basics, borrowing and subtraction, just the way I was taught. And then I was looking at the index, angles, and there was some stuff with some formulas, but very practical problems. You're making little steel things and how much bar steel we'll have to buy. Totally practical. And it was all my up through sixth grade math that was in it. There was a little bit of high school math in it, and I could have done it.
Sure.
That the book for training the welder that you buy, Thou Art in Heaven.
Yep.
Okay. You see, that's just looking at it literal. What you have to do is you just have to explain to them what it means.
Sure.
Less literal. You also can get the problems with black and white thinking. Let's say good and bad. Well, you can have degrees of good and bad. If I stick gum on the teacher's chair, maybe that's mischief. Shoplifting is not as bad as murder.
Right.
You see, you can make different degrees of badness.
But that's
But
challenging.
you do it with specific examples. You have to make specific examples of things I can put in the naughty mischief category. Okay, major crime, but non-violent, major crime, violent. Yeah, but it's done with specific examples.
Yeah, before I knew anything about autism, I remember engaging someone and I asked him, what makes you feel most alive? And he said, not being dead. And
Well, you see, but that's kind of I know what you see. If you asked that to me, I would know. I'm now.
No problem. Yeah, he was.
Things that made me really happy. I have to say, I did a 2.5 hour, almost a 3 hour geek out on live footage docking with a space station. Geeking out completely. They were talking about spacesuit zippers, and there was a little tiny air leak. One of the spacesuits, we've seen black teeth or white teeth. So they had an indicator of whether it was zipped up all the way.
Oh, so cool.
Discuss that. I was just geeking out on that stuff.
Oh, so cool. Can you tell me, just to pivot even further, about your journey from childhood to where you are now? I know it's a big one, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, I got very good early intervention. You've got a young child, and honestly, when I'm talking young child, 2, 3, and 4-year-old kids not talking. You have got to get them into therapy. You must not wait. And one advantage you got out in Silicon Valley is that you can afford therapy.
And what kind of therapy?
Well, I had a lot of speech therapy. Mm-hmm. What these kids need is a lot of hours of one-to-one with an effective teacher. Everyone's going to fight over exactly what the therapy is. What's important is an effective teacher. Let me tell you what an effective teacher is going to do. More speech. You also have to teach these children turn-taking. You got to teach them how to take turns. So if the child's lining up blocks, then we take turns lining up the blocks. Also teach basic skills like dressing, using a knife and fork. Just your basic skills. And then also there's now a paper that shows what the AIRS sensory integration methods are in a evidence-based method. They do work. But the worst thing you could do with a 2-year-old or 3-year-old is not talking. I don't really care what the reason is to do nothing. The therapies are the same as long as they don't have something physically wrong with them, like a cleft palate or something.
Sure.
See, that has to be fixed. But you've got to work with the little ones. Always giving them a chance to use their language. And then when I was about 3rd grade, that's when my art ability really showed up. Always build up on the thing they're good at. If the kids knows language really well, give them more harder books. You've got kids that are math whizzes. Let's say, okay, JavaScript, that runs Minecraft, that ran the Dragon's computer screens. Isn't that cool? And you might like to learn JavaScript. And people don't think to do that. I tried programming, it didn't work for me, but let me tell you, I know how to buy the books for it. And I know how to find the stuff online. Because for a lot of these kids, all I have to do is show it to them. And it will just take off. Okay, I can tell you what you need algebra for. You want to do quantum computing? You need linear algebra quantum computing from MIT.
And they'll go for it.
Paper. And you give that to the right kid, they'll take off.
And you build on the obsession.
I might make that paper into Snowflake because I don't understand that paper. But then there's another kind of mind that does. And one of the things I feel very strongly about is we've got to expose kids to these things. You want to see really cool math stuff? Go on Google Images and type in protein symmetry. Protein symmetry. You'll see patterns so cool and they're inside your own body.
And what was it like growing up? I know you were bullied sometimes.
Well,
for being different.
Fortunately, I managed to get through elementary school without being bullied.
Oh, that's great.
The bullying for me started in high school. But in elementary school, fortunately, my teacher did a method that they called peer-mediated intervention. It wasn't called that in the 50s. What Mrs. Deach did was she explained to the other children that I had a handicap, but it was not visible like crutches or a wheelchair, and that they needed to help me. High school bullying, and the only places I was not bullied was where there's a shared interest. Riding horses, electronics projects, model rockets. Those were places where there was no bullying.
And then in high school, you met Dr. Carlock or Mr. Carlock, who was kind of a mentor for it, a big mentor
Very
for
definitely,
you.
because I wasn't interested in studying. And I got interested in studying when studying became a path to a goal of becoming a scientist. So how to get around the algebra thing? To this day, I've never passed an algebra course.
That's amazing.
I got into college on probation. And fortunately, thank goodness, in 1967, algebra was not the required class.
Thank goodness.
Finite math, probability, statistics, and matrices.
Sure.
And it was a lot more visual, and I was able to, with tutoring, able to understand that. Statistics, I got a C as in Charlie, and I wobbled through it.
And today you're Temple Grandin, so I think it turned out okay.
Scientific paper we need to look at very carefully is the methods section. That's the part I look at. They tell me exactly how they did the experiment. There's been a lot of problems in biomedical research on replicating results. So one research group takes their cells and they shake them really hard, and the other just gently stirs them. I see this machine that was kind of a box thing, just gently kind of wobbled. So the way you stir up your samples affected your results.
Absolutely.
That's why you have to tell exactly what you did. I read papers in animal science, and they didn't tell me what breed of pig they used or what they fed it. These are very basic things, and they matter.
Definitely.
People will do the fancy statistics package. Oh, the latest thing. But then they'll make assumptions that just aren't right. Like social behavior in animals is random. It's a random variable. No. This is where you need the visual thinker. Because all that math is going to be wrong if you put the wrong assumptions into it.
Sure. And then at some point, I guess at around 15, you really got massive amounts of animal exposure and on the farm.
I got a chance to visit my aunt's ranch. I was 18. And if I hadn't gone to my aunt's 15, I was 15. Okay. And I went out to my aunt's ranch, and that's where I discovered cattle. And if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I wouldn't have gone into the cattle industry. This brings up another very interesting thing. Kids get interested in stuff they get exposed to. Steven Spielberg, he was dyslexic. He had a movie camera when he was a young child. You've got to get kids exposed to enough stuff to figure out what they might want to do.
Sure. His Super 8 camera saved his life, probably.
That's right. And Michelangelo was a 6th grade dropout.
Amazing.
But he grew up where they were doing all this art around in the different churches, and he probably could just walk to them, and that he was exposed to it.
And you felt a relationship with the animals. You could almost intuit more than...
The time that I was working in high school with the horses, I didn't know I was a visual thinker. It just was obvious to me, that animals would react to stuff they were seeing. I got more insight when I started to learn how different my thinking was from other people's thinking.
Yeah.
It was one of my very first cattle work. I got down the chutes just like the movie showed it. The movie shows visual thinking absolutely perfectly.
That's how you see things, almost with those angles?
Yep, all that stuff in that movie.
That was unbelievable.
No, I can just put a protractor on.
Oh, it's so great.
I can see, and then it showed we get off the plane in Tucson, it's really hot, it's like an oven.
You said I could see the heat.
Well, I remember stepping off that plane, and I did say, and they didn't have jet bridges in those days, and I stepped out onto the portable stair, and I go, do people live here? Then Anne says, we're at a 5,000 foot elevation. It's not going to be quite as hot. And she was right about it. But if I hadn't gone to the ranch, I wouldn't have ended up in the cattle industry. See, this is where, a kid's not going to learn programming if he's never exposed to it.
Sure.
Got to get exposed to it.
And there you are in front of me wearing a cowboy shirt, cowgirl shirt with a bolo tie with your initials on it. I mean, this changed everything, the exposure.
But this is it. Kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff. And I'm saying, if they were becoming video game designers, that would be just great. In fact, I love this book about Elon Musk. I've got some posters.
I love that book.
I love this book. Well, he loved video games.
Sure.
But he wanted to sell them, and he tried to rent a shop, and he couldn't sign a lease on it because he was
too young.
But I think one of the reasons why he didn't get addicted, well, he's 49 years old. And so I looked up the games he would have played.
Yep.
12. And I went online and I looked them up. And there's little Mario the Plumber.
Exactly. Super Mario.
And the other thing is, these computers used to break all the time and they'd show their guts off. You get the blue screen of death. And then the kid's going to go, what's all this code? You see, the things today, that doesn't happen.
They work perfectly.
It never shows its guts. And maybe that's, he's just old enough.
Such a great point.
To not gotten sucked into that.
We could have lost him to the opium den of video games.
This is what's happening. And he loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Exactly.
And then I saw those astronaut spacesuits. And it made me a costume designer. I looked it up online. The costume designer's going, I thought we were doing it for a movie. And then the engineers had to make the spacesuits actually work.
Sure.
But that's just so cool.
Yeah, I love that. You've mentioned how the iPhone works. You make it pretty on the outside and you get the engineers to do the inside. But
you make it easy to use.
Easy to use.
See, that's the thing. Because you look at some of these clunky interfaces, like, like I do journal article reviewing. I mean, some of the interfaces that they have, they are so bad.
And that's
Nobody has worked on that user experience. And you go on these awful web pages with...
And you're so good at creating a user interface that you were able to do that for cattle and make their experience easier.
Well, I just started looking at, cattle. I've been in a meat plant and there'd be a paper towel hanging down like this. How about shut a meat plant down?
I don't understand. A paper towel?
Paper towel hanging out of a dispenser.
Sure.
And the cattle see it and it makes them stop.
I don't understand.
The paper towel's hanging out of the dispenser and it's going like this.
It's waving.
See that as they're coming up the chute.
And what is it?
And they won't walk by it.
What does it mean to them?
It's just something that moves.
You don't do it.
And they won't walk by it. And it shuts the plant down until you get rid of the paper towels.
Isn't that, and this is just something you're attuned to. You also mentioned that sometimes cows are used to seeing someone on a horse, but not on foot.
That's right. And horses are the same way. Like one thing that's been a problem with adopting Mustangs is you can ride them just fine because nobody's been bad to them on their backs, but during roundups and things, they've been chased around, so they've learned that people on foot are bad, unless the people are prisoners dressed totally different.
And then
the
what?
Prisoners on the ground, because the prisoners have done some Mustang training. The prisoners are the good guys, and they're afraid of the guards because the guards are wearing Western outfits.
Isn't that fascinating?
But a person on the ground and a person on the back, that's two different things to the horse. And so you can get situations where there's other situations where the horse is terrible for riding, and you can do everything on the ground. Pick up its feet, shoe it, veterinary. It's absolutely fine for all the stuff on the ground.
Got you. Temple, you've noted that only 26% of your language circuit is online, and yet you are so articulate. How did you bolster your verbal skills?
Well, basically, you can increase the bandwidth on the circuits that are left. That's why the speech therapy is so important, because there's less fibers, but by using them, you can increase the bandwidth on the fibers that are still left. Now, if there are no fibers, you're in trouble. And the same kind of scanning is used for looking at head injuries. You want to see some ugly stuff.
It gets pretty bad.
That's awful.
But you've been able to really maximize your 26% as if it were 100.
Maximize the 26%, but I still have tremendous working memory problems. Here's a tip for teachers.
Sure.
Don't burden a kid with long strings of verbal instruction. They cannot remember it. Give them a pilot's checklist. Here's step 1, step 2, step 3. Another thing you got to do with these kids is give them time to respond. You'll ask them to use their words, but give them time to respond. They're like a phone on one bar. It takes a little time to download the web pages.
And here I am asking you some fairly long questions at times. What's that like for you?
Well, what's bad is if they tell you maybe 5 steps, of something to do. Like when I worked in a dairy, they had a checklist on the wall of how to set up the milking equipment. I would have been in a lot of trouble if that checklist hadn't been there. You see, I can't remember the sequence. You see, I've got a very long-term memory. So I've got the cloud for long-term memory, but if you're into computers, you're only a 286 for the chip.
Got it.
Maybe an early calculator.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Style calculator. There's can't multitask. So the other thing is you got to learn how to drive and to get around the issue of multitasking. And if I hadn't learned to drive, there would have been no cattle industry. There would have been no career without driving. And it's going to take longer. I was very lucky that on my aunt's ranch, her mailbox was 3 miles away on a dirt road. So that gave 6 miles of driving on a dirt road until I had 200 miles of driving. Then we very carefully started traffic. What you got to do is get the operation of the car into motor memory before you touch traffic. That's how you solve the problem with multitasking. So what we need to be doing, a lot of these kids, they need a lot more time, big parking lots. Okay, right now with COVID, all the office parks are empty. Those would be perfect places to practice driving, where you don't have to do the multitasking of traffic. A lot more practice so that braking, gas, and I learned on a manual. 3 on the tree with a terrible clutch.
That's incredible. You said 3 on the tree?
3 on the tree, where it's 3 gears on the.
Got it. On the stick.
Got it. Really, really horrible clutch. And we started that in the horse pasture.
And I imagine it was bouncing a lot for you. And
well, yeah. I just drove that around the horse pasture. But then very quickly I was out on the dirt road and we'd stall some. But you do all of that in a totally safe place. We didn't start that truck up where I could have rammed it through my aunt's patio gate. I talked to one family, their kid took out the garage door. That's where you don't do it.
Sure, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. You want to have a long driveway.
We had a big horse pasture, and that's where I started.
So perfect.
Then very soon out on the dirt road. And in just a few weeks, I had 200 miles of driving with no traffic. Then you carefully go into traffic. But driver's ed shoves them into it too quick.
Got it. That makes total sense.
They can take the class right away. That's fine. But the driving part of it, I'd want a lot more practice before they go out with driver's ed in very, very safe places. But I'm finding a lot of parents where if their kid's got an autism label, they get overprotected. Now, if their kid's out in Silicon Valley and he's in the gifted math class, he's the same kid. but he's going down a totally different trajectory. They're getting hung up in the words. I see the programmers. I see the kid, and I go, wait a minute, I saw a kid like that over at the autism meeting. He's just like this other kid I saw at the gifted meeting. They're both geeks, and they're going in totally different directions.
What directions are those?
Well, go get a job in Silicon Valley or end up in the basement playing video games.
Got it.
That's what I'm talking about. What I'm finding, with a fully verbal, there's two paths.
Either
you get out and get a life, and the other thing is you got to learn how to work. Because I'm seeing all these granddaddies coming up to me, and they find out that they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. But granddaddy had a paper route and learned how to work. We've got to find substitutes for the childhood paper route. Walking dogs, volunteer jobs at churches are great, but now that's all shut down due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But those are perfect jobs for 11-year-olds to learn how to do a task on a schedule, outside the family. Somebody else is the boss. And you are going to serve the food at the church social or whatever it is, or pass out programs. It's a job. You put on your good clothes and you do it. That's learning working skills. Also, a lot of these kids aren't learning things like shopping and bank account. Basic stuff.
Sure. Speaking of learning, one of the things that really captivated me in your movie was around frustration tolerance. You were creating an optical illusion.
That's right.
And
I got mad at it, and that did happen.
And yet you stuck with it.
But that's the thing. My science teacher wouldn't tell me how to make it.
That was Mr. Carlock, or Dr. Carlock.
He wanted me to figure it out. He gave me one little tiny hint. Let me see a picture in a book. And if you look at the title of the movie, and the optical illusion room goes off into space, you see the trapezoidal outline. He let me see that picture for about 5 seconds. That was it. It was in a textbook.
Unbelievable.
But he wanted me to figure it out. They wanted me to figure some things out for myself. And all the projects in the movie are real. I actually did all the projects in the shows.
What about frustration for you? Is that tough for you?
It's frustrating, but you've got to, I did stick with it.
You did.
And there were things where I remember, when you cut plexiglass, you score it and then you snap it. And, I used to get mad at plexiglass when it didn't break along the score line.
Yeah.
Wasn't something to be really proud of.
Definitely.
But, you still, the other thing that's really helped me now is I've been on antidepressant medication for years. And that's described in my book, Thinking in Pictures. In my book, Thinking in Pictures, I describe all my experiences with antidepressants. They saved me.
How so?
Well, cleared up all the colitis attacks and stress-related health problems I had. I used to be so anxious. I just, couldn't stand it. And a low dose of the antidepressant drug really worked. And the mistake that gets made is they give too high a dose, then the person gets agitation and insomnia. And, I hate that drug. I'll never try it again. And I want to emphasize it's the low dose of the right drug.
Sure. It has to.
It seems like us visual thinkers, we're panic monsters. Because I worked with some other visual thinkers, one that was definitely autistic, the other two that were not. Low-dose Prozac has kept them off the drugs and the alcohol.
And I love that you mentioned it's not a one-size-fits-all, because it's really, our neurochemistry is also very different. Well,
and there's other people. There's a type of autistic person that's a word thinker. They tend to be a whole lot calmer. But we have to understand that minds are different. I'll never forget the lady at the Denver airport who walked up to me. She said, "Thank you so much for your book, Thinking in Pictures. It saved my marriage. I now understand my engineer husband."
Yeah, that I could see how that would be the case.
Well, you understand how they react to things differently.
Sure. Then
be less likely to, think he snubbed her or did.
Exactly.
You see, the emotions are different. You see, the more social emotional mind, the emotions are all about relationships. I'm like getting all emotional over standing in front of the vehicle assembly building and in the launch control room.
Sure.
And then watching all those launch videos, I was just getting really emotional. But it's something that's just so cool, to do something that cool.
Whereas a different presentation of autism, a different autistic person might.
Well, the thing is, I'm talking about the autistic person as a whole, regardless of whether they're visual, mathematical, or verbal. They get more emotional about the stuff they do.
Sure.
Than personal relationships.
That makes so much sense.
My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes.
I read that.
The most emotional that he ever got was when his work that he'd done with another guy that probably had autism.
Sure.
A plane went from Chicago to New York without the pilots touching the controls. That was the happiest day of my grandfather's life.
That makes sense.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. What was your happiest day?
Well, I've just had, just when I've had some projects work, we've got stuff to work, really a lot of anxiety to get it to work. And it's even like during the SpaceX launch, okay, this next stage separation. I had these cameras where you could see everything. I couldn't believe it. Cameras on the side of the rocket and stuff. God, we just got to get these two stages separated. Then I found I think a cell phone video that somebody took in the launch control room. Elon Musk is in there. He's glued to that same window, right, where I had stood in there. Then he's looking down at the computer like this. Then he's back up again.
Wow.
Well, I know exactly what he was doing. I don't know which terminal he was looking at, but I'm going to bet you it might have been stage separation because that's really critical. He was at the window and then.
Wow. So his head went way down.
Well, because he had to put his head down. They had social distancing, so they had all the computers all spread out just on folding tables. And so I don't know which screen he was looking at, but I'm going to guess it had to either it was a flight sequence or it was stage separation.
Got you. So since you mentioned
stuff. Yeah, and I can understand exactly why he was doing it. I was getting the same anxiety I'd get on my equipment startups. Is it going to work? And then as soon as they got into orbit, I go, okay, we'll go home now. And
all good.
They're fine now for a while.
So,
but I can totally, that excitement. And that's, I watched the whole thing live.
Got it. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about fear, and I'm guessing you've experienced fear in your life. And I'm wondering if you hadn't, is there something that you wish you had done, but that fear got in the way of you doing it?
Well, fortunately, I was able to see doors. There's a scene in the movie where I get the editor's card. That's a very important scene because I realized if I wrote for that magazine, that would help my career. And I think a lot of people, they don't see the door. They say, well, I got to teach my kid to interview. But so many good jobs are going in the back door. And I've got to thinking, what would happen to me as a student today? Let's say I flunked algebra. I'm in a school where they've taken out the skilled trades, but I looked up cool videos about automated warehouses. I would have been getting interested like in that Amazon warehouses. That all would have been very interesting.
Yes.
And yes, you have to work your butt off there. But what I've seen in my industry is somebody gets a job on the line, 10 years later, they design the new plant. That is a reasonable career path. I would see that as a door. Yes, I'm going to have to work my hindy off, walking 9 miles a day, picking merchandise, make myself really good at it. Then when stuff breaks, I'll fix it.
And you look
see,
so.
But you see, well, a lot of people don't see that in very large corporations, that entry-level positions can be a door. I know they make the engineers space that clean all the junk off the used rocket boosters. I heard about one person that got an entry-level job and now is helping design rockets. I talked to a lady, super smart, and she knew she had a high IQ. She was a waitress at a restaurant near Cape Canaveral, and she got to talking to space station designers. You know what? She designed stuff for the space station. Wow. That's backdoor. You see, I figured out really early on that you meet the right people. Like you meet the right, that you can
get
go
what you
into
want.
An entry-level position, but you have to pay your dues.
Sure.
You have to pay your dues. One of the things that I've seen some young people do today, they want to become a manager and they haven't paid their dues. You got to work every job on that floor. That's what you got to do. And
part of the deal.
That's something I figured that out early on how to find the back door.
Yeah, you recognized early on that was the cost of doing business. And it sounds like fear did not really limit you in spite of that. You actually were able to go for it.
Well, it was weird. I discussed this in Thinking in Pictures. There's 2 ways to fight fear. You sort of fight fire with fire or retreat to my room. And something kept me going. One of the things when I was in high school, I was never allowed to become a recluse in my room. That was never allowed. Also, I basically ran the school's horse barn for 3 years. So I learned how to work. It's a big problem. Academic skills and working skills, they're not the same thing.
Sure.
No, I learned how to work.
That's brilliant.
And a lot of parents, they don't see the door. They don't think to look up programming online. Like I was looking at all the stuff about loss of skills. So I was going shopping for warehouse equipment. Well, the absolute coolest is this thing in England. It is really cool that a grocery store has. Just seeing how this stuff works. And now you can look at it on YouTube. Well, these are things that could get kids interested, but somebody's got to show it to them.
Yep.
That's the thing. So I try to talk about all the things that they can do programming stuff online and buy the books for it. And when we are Barnes and Noble's, it's only open just partially now. But I've gone into Barnes and Noble and I've gone through the computer programming books, and they don't look that interesting. They got boring covers. But then what you do is say, well, if you learn this JavaScript, all right, you can learn how Minecraft works, but you can also learn how those screens on the Dragon works, and that's much cooler. And it's Linux, so I'll get them a book on Linux because I got to get them a book for the right platform. See, I do know that much about it. But people don't think to expose kids to this stuff, and it's not expensive.
Yeah. It sounds like, I'm just really moved by your voracious appetite for knowledge. I'm wondering also, you've touched on this a little bit, but I have to ask, how have you been able to navigate this neurotypical world and stay so grounded?
Well, I've then keep myself extremely busy. So what I've been doing with COVID now, well, I got the computer guy here. We bought out the last equipment they had. So I've got this mic that looks like a robot. and because you got to get the Zoom conferences going. Well, I'm working on a lot of writing now. I'm very concerned about the visual thinkers getting screened out. I'm going to be writing about this, working on another book, because everything's been canceled. And my fall events are now all half canceled. And then I've got some out of the country trips. I'm going to cancel those, where everything's just canceling out.
What are you feeling in light of all these cancellations? Are you disappointed? Are you disheartened? Angry?
Well, I've been trying to replace as much as I can with Zoom conferences.
Got it.
That's
try to get
what
practical.
I'm trying to do. And so I learned how to use Zoom in a real hurry. And the other thing is working on writing. And then my students' research has been completely messed up. Fortunately, two of my students already had projects. Let me tell you about my student's visual thinking horse project.
All yours.
And I'm not kidding. You have a horse. You've ridden him in this arena. And he's never been fine. Now he's throwing a big fit in this arena. Well, what we wanted to do is to see if an object like a child's play set would be perceived by the horse as something different when it was rotated 90 degrees.
Huh.
So you train the horse to go by this thing. It's got a swing and a slide on it, bright colored plastic. And think about it, how something's going to look different. A stapler looks different like this than like that.
Yeah, I'm looking at a stapler from various angles right now.
Now you're looking at a stapler.
They look very different.
And a stapler frontways.
Definitely.
Okay,
different.
You're going to get the same thing with a bicycle. It looks very different sideways and frontways.
Absolutely.
Well, this play set is the same way. So she trained the horse to walk by it many, many times, and then it's all of a sudden it's turned. Yeah, it became almost a new object.
And from that,
yeah, picture. Okay, so if this was a slide, okay, you face it this way versus like that.
Exactly. I'm looking at a side of a book and the front of a book.
That's right. And this thing had a slide on it, a little swing, and then on one end of it had a little plastic tree, and the other end of it had a plastic house. And so that looked very different.
And what were the findings?
The horse stopped, flared its nostrils, and it was a new thing. Now, this was all done at a walk because I didn't want to have a student dumped into the middle of the play set by galloping towards it. That would have been too dangerous. So everything was done at a very slow walk, but the horse would stop, the nostrils would flare, it'd bring its head up. It was obvious that it was something new.
What's important about that finding?
Well, it explains a horse safety issue where, okay, you introduce a horse to something new, you better show him all sides of it. You better show him all sides of it. Because you see, we would look at a play set and go, that's a children's toy.
Right.
And we wouldn't care how it was oriented.
Exactly.
So the horse, he doesn't even know what it was.
So
and it became a new object when you rotated it.
Wow, isn't that great?
So that's what we did with it. So that was an experiment that we just finished up. She got her paper written up. And then my other students are working on some review articles. My former student who's now on the faculty here, her project's ruined. No, it's been a real mess. Horse training class was canceled. What they're planning to do this fall is put all the big classes online and try to have the labs in person and some of the small seminars in person in the big classroom. No, it's a complete, total mess.
So I have a final question for you, unless you have others, but I just have to ask you, Temple, if you could magically implant into the brains of all the people on the planet with information about autism, what would you want them to know, and how might the world be a better place if they did know?
Well, they need to use the skills of people on the autism spectrum. Who've got skills. And people are just getting, too locked into labels. And I have read an interesting paper just last night, because I've been doing a lot of surfing for this new book on the neurodiversity hypothesis with looking at cave art and early musical instruments. Maybe these things were made by people with autism. About how valuable a person with autism would be, that was a visual thinker, on foraging for food. They would remember where everything is in a way that the social yak-yaks around the campfire would not be remembering it. And that's a brand new paper, the neurodiversity hypothesis for autism, way back in ancient times. You see, the thing, what's been learned about it is there's a really interesting paper called Genomic Trade-offs. Autism and schizophrenia, the steep price for a human brain. The same genes that make the brain big also cause autism and schizophrenia. In autism, you get an overgrowth of certain circuits. In schizophrenia, you get an undergrowth, and then you get a network that falls apart. But it's in the same regions of the brain. It is the genes that control stem cell proliferation, because that's what makes brains big. Another really lovely paper I really like is Solitary Mammals as a Model for Autism. There's genetic crossover with the social animals and then the less social animals. Okay, lions, wolves, and dogs are more social than panthers, and mountain lions are leopards. And the more solitary animals got less oxytocin. Well, does that mean that a leopard's defective?
Absolutely not.
No, it doesn't. It means it's part of normal variation. Now, obviously, you get too much of these traits, then you get a schizophrenic where the neural network basically is falling apart. Or you get a person with autism where they're completely nonverbal and they don't have any skills. But I want to warn you, some of those people that are nonverbal have a locked-in syndrome. They can learn to type independently. And they describe a sensorily fragmented, jumbled world where they can't control their movements. And there's a really interesting book called How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? By a person who has a very hard time controlling the movements. And there are some nonverbals that can type independently, and they basically have a locked-in syndrome.
So we may underestimate very frequently
that's
the abilities.
The problem. We've got to look at what the person can do. There needs to be a lot more emphasis. I love what Stephen Hawking had to say about disability. He said, concentrate on the things your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. Right before he died, he could do math in his head super well, and he could float around in the weightless plane.
That's
Those
right.
are two things that he could do super well.
And I'm just so thankful, Temple, that you've been able in this lifetime to do so many things so well and be a role model for so many and a hero to so many. So I'm just so grateful to you, Temple.
Get out there and be everything that they can be. But on the other hand, you need some of the, sometimes the techies have an over-optimistic view of things. We got to, some of the other neurotypicals get out there and then use tech for bad things. sometimes it's hard for them to accept that something they've made might do something bad. Let's be very careful with artificial intelligence.
That makes...
Got to be really careful with that.
Agreed.
I'll never forget the scene in Space Odyssey where they turned Hal off. He had an off switch. It's actually a very sad scene. I cried during it. It's on YouTube. You can look it up.
I'm familiar. Yeah, you're tearing up now just thinking about it.
Yeah, and you know why they could turn him off? Because he didn't have a smart spacesuit that was connected to the ship. He had a dumb spacesuit. Hal couldn't turn off the air in the spacesuit. That's why he was able to turn Hal off, because he had a dumb spacesuit that wasn't interconnected to the ship, thank goodness. Now, this is thinking, like, when they made that movie, they wouldn't even thought of that. Because if the spacesuit electronics had been Wi-Fi'd into the ship, Hal could have shut off the air in the spacesuit, but he couldn't do that.
And why does it cause you to tear up? What about it is so deeply moving?
Hal didn't realize that didn't even know he was being bad. He was afraid the humans would just wreck the mission. So I'm going to get rid of the astronauts because they might wreck the mission. He didn't know that what he was doing was bad.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Temple,
go back and play that scene.
I'll check it out.
But then I got to thinking, well, it's really lucky he had a dumb spacesuit, because otherwise Hal would have turned off the spacesuit air, and then the astronaut wouldn't have been able to turn off Hal.
Exactly.
Yep. Hal's got to have an off switch.
Brilliant.
It's but so maybe we need some other, what are the philosophers for? Maybe to make the techies think. And there's some of the verbal autistics that really like philosophy. But sometimes the techies don't think enough about what their stuff could do.
It's a great point. Well, we're going to close, and I want to thank you so much.
Things I get emotional about.
Oh, yeah. Well, Temple, I'm really honored. I want to say thank you for your time today. I'm so grateful for you meeting with me and sharing your wisdom with my listeners. Thank you so much, Temple.
Oh, it's great to be on your show. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.